Are you ready for some football? We are. We're with our college football coverage team. I'm Darnell Mayberry, Assistant Sports Editor, your host for today, with Jenny Carlson, columnist, Kyle Fredrickson, OSU beat writer, and with us from somewhere between here and Houston, Ryan Aber, our OU football writer. Guys, we got a big game Saturday morning.
Yep.
OU Houston, it's a top 15 matchup highlighted by the quarterback matchup of Baker Mayfield, Heisman Trophy candidate, and Greg Ward Jr. from Houston. Guys, which one is the more dangerous quarterback? Jenny, let's start with you.
Well, it's a great question because both of these guys are really able to make plays with their feet moving, and Baker Mayfield wants to get out and run and really throw out of the run. Greg Ward seems maybe more of sort of leaning towards the scrambler type. Definitely able to throw off the run, but I think they're going to definitely be a challenge for both defenses. I mean, you're talking about an OU defense that replaces a ton of guys at linebacker, has one returning defensive back, but going to be breaking in some new guys and coverage unit there too. So I think it's really going to be a game that you're going to see both quarterbacks make plays. I'll go with Baker Mayfield as more dangerous, but I think both these guys are going to cause problems for the other defense.
Ryan, what do you think?
I think it's the other way around. I think Greg Ward Jr. is the more dangerous one in this game because of those things that Jenny mentioned about Oklahoma's linebackers. OU replaces pretty much everybody who would have a hand in trying to corral Greg Ward Jr. I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's going to be really difficult for OU's offense to find ways to contain him. These are the kind of quarterbacks that have given the Sooners fits in the past, and with as many guys as OU lost in the middle of their defense, this could be a tough situation for the Sooners.
We're talking about Greg Ward Jr. He's a dual threat guy, and when you're talking about him, you got to think for OU, how do you stop him?
Right.
With all these linebackers, the changes that they've had. Ryan, let's go to you. What does the linebacker core for OU need to do to stop Greg Ward Jr. tomorrow morning?
I think the biggest thing is just keep him in the pocket. Don't let him beat you with his feet. Force him to beat you with his arm and play into those guys that they have at the back end, guys like Jordan Thomas, Dakota Austin, Ahmad Thomas, and Steven Parker. They've got a pretty solid secondary. You need to put the onus on those guys instead of Greg Ward scrambling around and beating those linebackers.
Yeah, and we've seen, I think it was Barry Trammell who wrote earlier this week about the struggles that Oklahoma has historically had with dual threat quarterbacks. They've lost to several of them. Now, they've beat some too. I mean, it's not without precedent that they could win this game. But I do think whenever they've faced offenses that are slanted towards one identity or the other, they almost always win, even when that identity was, like Mike Leach throwing it 700 yards a game at Texas Tech. If they are facing an offense that even is really prolific one way, they tend to do pretty well. So they need to do what they can to make Greg Ward, make this Houston offense more one-dimensional. But it's a tall test. There's no doubt about it because you are breaking in that new linebacking core, guys that they like. But until you see them out there under fire as the starters, as the guys, that's going to be a really interesting test for them. I think, again, I like OU's offense to just be able to score more against Houston. But, man, it is going to be a huge challenge. And it's a good setup for Ohio State in a couple weeks because they run essentially the same offense.
Kyle, we'll get you here in a second, I promise. Ryan, let's piggyback on what Jenny said, though. Is this, with so many losses to that linebacking core, is this a great season opening test for that unit, or is this a nightmare scenario?
Uh-oh.
We cannot hear you, Ryan.
Uh-oh. He seems to be talking really
He's
eloquently,
He's
but
passionate
we can't
about
hear
whatever
him.
he's saying. Jenny, you mentioned the test. Is this a great season opening test, or is this a nightmare scenario with so many losses?
Well, I mean, I think it remains to be seen. I do think it could prove to be nightmare. If the ball starts rolling Houston's way, it's a home field. Big stage. Obviously, they've been in some situations where the stage has been big. Beat Florida State, rolled them up pretty good last year in their bowl game. So they are not without, some experience in tough scenarios like this. So don't be surprised to see that crowd get going, the emotion get going. So I think early is going to be really important for Oklahoma to not like we saw last night in that Louisville game. They marched right down the field, and I'm not saying that was the same, a similar caliber of matchups again that you're seeing in this game, but I think that you could see it really snowballing if OU's not careful. Ryan may have a thought. It sounds like his audio may have gotten fixed. Are you with us, Ryan?
Yeah, I can hear y'all. Can y'all hear me?
Now we
can hear you.
Yes, no?
Yes. We got you.
Okay, good. I said a nightmare scenario out of those two just because of all of the guys that OU is replacing in that group. Not that they can't be really good with guys like Obanya Okoronkwo, Tay Evans, and Will Johnson moving up from the nickelback spot. But to have this kind of test with this kind of quarterback this early in the season, I think it's really tough. And we're going to learn a lot about these linebackers, but what we might learn is that they've got some seasoning to do. The good thing is they play a team in 2 weeks who's very similar in Ohio State. I think that can be good for OU's defense, although it could be good for Ohio State's offense, too, to get that look against Houston as well.
Let's turn our attention to Oklahoma State. You're watching Football Friday. I'm Darnell Mayberry with Jenny Carlson, Kyle Fredrickson, and Ryan Aber. Kyle, Oklahoma State opens the season tomorrow afternoon against Southeastern Louisiana.
That's right.
I don't think we're going to have any surprises in terms of the result, but what will we learn? What might we learn from this opening game, and what will we not learn probably?
I don't think we're going to learn a whole ton, but the one thing that I'm definitely going to be paying attention to, and something that I think is going to develop over the course of these first couple games, is Taylor Cornelius a suitable backup? Is he going to be a star? I don't know. Even if he throws for 500 yards in the second half against Southeastern Louisiana, I don't think we can say anything definitive about his skill set quite yet. But as we see in quarterback injuries and the need for these backups, OSU at least needs a guy who can run the offense in tempo, avoid pre-snap penalties, utilize all the weapons they have on the edge. Cornelius is a walk-on, but he's a guy with a 6'6" frame. He's got a big arm. And I think his performance in some of the slop time in these non-conference games in a lot of ways might dictate what they want to do with Keandre Woodtee. Do they want to redshirt him? Is he going to be a guy who's going to get more snaps in practice coming up? Mike Gundy was really non-committal about it when asked about it before this game in their pregame press conference. And I think it's because they need to see Taylor Cornelius be a reliable option, be a guy who isn't afraid to go out in the crowd noise and make some plays. So that's an area where I think we'll learn a little bit on Saturday, where we definitely won't learn anything. And what OSU fans want to know most, you probably know what I'm going to say, offensive line improvement. We can look back to last year. OSU averages something like 180 yards a game on the ground in non-conference play. I'm sure at that point we're writing stories, hey, things are maybe getting better. Well, they didn't. Big 12 play, that number dropped below 120 yards per game. So we should see some improvement. We should see the run game flourish, especially in this game. Against FCS opponents last year, Southeastern gave up more than 150 yards per game on the ground. Doing some FCS research
Look
there.
Look at Kyle with the stats
being
here.
Prepared. But that's what I'm saying. We're not going to learn anything about it. So for OSU fans out there looking for something in week one, yes, get excited if we see Barry J. Sanders break out a big run or Chris Carson be as productive as we think he might be. But by no means is it going to be an answer to anything that we think about this season.
Well, and I think that's a great point, especially when it comes to the run game. We, as outsiders, may not learn anything necessarily about the offensive line or the run game, the running backs. But for those guys, for OSU's improvement as they move forward, they need to establish some good habits in this game. They need to really, start to really set the tone for what they're going to do later. Yes, they're going to be bigger, more physical, faster, all of those things. But, you want to see running backs who are getting upfield. We saw a lot as last year went on, a lot of dancing around in the backfield. Holes weren't there. So you want to see running backs able to get upfield both by the block and by their activity. So you want to start to see those habits established in this game. We aren't going to know. We aren't going to be able to walk away and say Oklahoma State is a better running team this year. But for their sake, they need to establish those habits, those good, just established ways of doing things moving forward.
There's a lot of newcomers on this team, especially on the defensive side of the ball, Kyle. Who should we keep an eye on, and who's most likely to stand out?
Well, I think we got to talk about defensive ends when we look at the defense. Now, these guys are newcomers in the fact that they're new starters. They're sophomores on this team, so we've seen glimpses of them. But Jordan Brailford and Jarrell Owens really, fill some big shoes with Emmanuel Ogbah and Jimmy Bean. How are they going to be able to rush the passer and create havoc like those guys did before? Now, they're going to get some help because the interior alignment is so deep. There's 6 guys who are going to rotate in and out of there. Vincent Taylor and Mote are leading that group, 2 guys who are veteran and proven. That will take some pressure off the edges, but we've heard so much about how athletic these guys on the end are, how young and strong they are. Well, now it's time to see what it actually is going to become, because when you have guys like Ogbah, who's going to be rushing NFL quarterbacks this year, that changes the dynamic of your defense. Everyone else kind of has to step up in their lack of presence. So I'd look to those 2 sophomores as guys that I'd really like to see, whether or not they live up to the hype.
Yeah, and I'll go on the offensive side of the ball and talk about receivers. I mean, a lot of these guys are known commodities. We've seen them for a lot of years. But with Marcell Ateman's injury, and you know what you're going to get out of James Washington. He might have 200 yards receiving tomorrow. I mean, I don't know. And even if he doesn't, you're going to get production in big games out of James Washington. But with Marcell Ateman's injury, who's a go-to? And you're also replacing David Glidden, a very good sort of outlet for Mason Rudolph last year. A guy that if he got into trouble, he always knew that Glidden would find a spot and he could get the ball to him. So who are those guys that are going to step up and become, those go-to guys, especially in Ateman's absence? Is a Jalen McCleskey going to be able to find open spots like David Glidden? Is Juwan Seals going to step forward and be a big play receiver in Ateman's absence? Those are some questions. I think, again, not necessarily new faces, but in new roles. How do they play? How do they play on Saturday afternoon?
Right. Let's stick with the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned the running backs, sort of a tailback by committee approach up there right now. So many guys. You got Chris Carson, Barry J. Sanders, Jeff Carr, Rennie Childs, and Justice Hill.
Yeah.
Kyle, is one of these guys going to step up and separate themselves from the rest of the pack?
One of them's going to have to, but the thing I'm going to say is I think multiple of them are going to be a little disenfranchised about their role this year. You can't have 5 tailbacks and expect all of them to get the type of production to be happy on the roster.
It's like 5 point guards. It
right,
just
exactly.
doesn't work, does it?
It doesn't work.
No.
I did a little bit of research. You go back 5 years, the most carries any 5th tailback has had on this team is 14 in a season. So you have 5 guys who feel like they're pretty well established, whether it be the 3 seniors and Childs or Carson or Barry J., a guy like Chris Carr, who's a sophomore but has proven he's shifty enough to help in the return game and become a bigger factor. And then Justice Hill, who was really the talk of fall camp as a guy who could really be a premier back as a freshman. So when I look at this group, I still think Chris Carson's got to get the early nod. He has a ridiculous frame. He's got an NFL body. We've seen flashes of it. Last year, I think when he got hurt against Texas early in Big 12 play, there might have been some mental issues for him in terms of being ready at this level, going from JUCO. So I think he's the leader in the clubhouse, but there's really not much of a leash this year. If one of these guys is struggling early and one really emerges as the go-to guy, or as Mike Gundy said, the hot hand, they're going to stick with him because there's really no reason to stick with one guy based on what happened with last season because of how inefficient they were.
Yeah, and I do think we'll probably see, 1 or 2 of these guys emerge as the go-to running backs, but I don't know who those guys are going to be. Although I think it's going to be obvious to some degree, maybe not Saturday because, again, it's one of those things you can't know for certain, but I think we're going to see the separation, and I think that may be what the coaches are willing to let play out, is just get these guys out there, see what's there, see what they're able to do, and go from there. I mean, I'm with you, Kyle. I think Chris Carson is likely the number 1 guy ultimately, but if he doesn't bring it, if he doesn't produce, there's no reason you don't at least try the other guys. You've got other options. But I think the coaches are essentially saying, you guys go out and show us who deserves the carries.
Let's end it with everyone's favorite topic, Big 12 expansion. Ryan, how big is this game for Houston's Big 12 hopes?
Oh, I think that I'm not sure how big of an effect it's going to have. I think it's more perception than anything else when you talk about just the impact that people have watching the Cougars that they can hang in the Big 12. I think it's interesting. I was just reading a blog by Barry Trammell talking about visiting Houston's campus yesterday and said that they were Big 12 ready in all ways. Now, whether the vote falls that way, we'll see. But I don't know that this game plays a whole lot into that.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think this is a win they're in, lose they're not. I don't think it's that or whatever scenario you want to look at there. But I do think when you look at the remainder of Houston's schedule, after Oklahoma, they've got a couple of marquee games. They'll go to Cincinnati, but then they've got a heavy dose of UConn, Navy, SMU, Central Florida, Tulane. I mean, just not a ton of opportunities to really, show on a big stage. And I think having fans there, seeing the type of crowd that they have, that was one of the things. You look at a couple of teams that are in this Big 12 mix who played last night. I think UConn and I can't remember who the other team was, but under 30,000 fans for home games. I mean, that's the type of thing that Big 12 people are looking at. So what's the crowd look like? And then how they compete, what kind of eyes people want to put on Houston. So again, I don't think the outcome is going to determine Houston's chances in the Big 12, but there are some other factors that people will definitely be looking at here.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, Ginny?
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Bring it.
Oh, I was just going to say it's funny that Ginny ran down Houston's schedule, and virtually all the other teams she mentioned were teams that are also in the conversation for the Big 12.
So we think. I don't know if we actually know who's in the conversation, but it seems as though everybody
There's
maybe.
a lot of them. There's
exactly.
a lot of them. Hey, thanks, guys. OU, Houston at 11 a.m., Southeastern Louisiana, Oklahoma State at 2:30. For the best football coverage, follow our college football team at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.